All right, so you don't have to, but if you want to make the crust in advance, I'm going to quickly show you the process. The reason that we need to chill the butter in advance is everything about making a crust needs to be very cold, and it needs an opportunity to relax, which takes time. So it's going to be the first thing we prepare, and if you have it prepared in advance, it'll be even have a longer chance to rest, which will make it more delicate. So we have our 1 1/4 cup of flour. I've just taken this out of the freezer. I have my 1 stick of butter, so 8 tablespoons that we cut up. If you are using an unsalted butter, put about a 1/2 teaspoon of salt in with your flour now and just mix it together. The only other things we're going to be adding in are going to be a 1/2 teaspoon of white vinegar. You could use an apple cider vinegar, but you actually want something that's a little more acidic. So the white vinegar is going to be better than an apple cider, a white wine, a champagne, a rice wine. Lemon juice isn't going to be acidic enough. And this just helps you with your flakes. If you don't have it, don't have any vinegars, you could just use ice water, and that's fine as well. And then the other thing we're going to be putting in is ice water. So I have my stick of butter, 1 1/4 cup of flour. I'm going to probably use maybe 2 to 3 tablespoons of ice water and just a 1/2 teaspoon of that vinegar. But we'll see how much when it all comes to it. So I'm going to turn the screen down and let you see what I'm doing in the bowl. All right. So this is just blended up nice and cold. These are our 32 pieces of cold butter. And I'm going to use my fingers. You could definitely use a food processor. If I was making a double crust, I would use a food processor. It's just easier. And this has actually been in here for longer than half an hour, so it's quite cold. I'm covering the butter bits in the flour, just slightly tossing it together. Now what I'm going to do is grab in and kind of squeeze this together so that those butter bits get pinched into the flour. Some people like to grate their butter on like a box grater, on the coarse side of a box grater. I don't tend to, but there's nothing wrong if you want to do it that way. Oof. I might actually need to have this warm up a little bit. Or I might grab a pastry cutter. I'm going to grab 2 knives. So if you don't have a pastry cutter, you can just take 2 knives from your silverware drawer and cut them in corners like this, which will nip the edges of the butter. Not because the butter is so cold. Let me get my pastry cutter. So this is called a pastry cutter. Same idea as the knives, it just has these planes that will slice the butter and mix it into the flour. The critical thing is we don't want to be using an electric mixer like a KitchenAid or an electric beater. We want this to be coarse bits. Butter contains water. It's one of the few fats that contains water. And that water will get stored in the pastry and will rise and turn to steam when the pastry bakes. So you will get better flakes with butter than you would with another fat. And if it were blended too smooth, we're not going to have the steam shoots all across our pastry in the same way. So I'm just kind of pressing down to break these up and then pinching them to incorporate. Now I'm going to be adding the vinegar first. There's a range on how much ice water we're going to require, and that's going to be a bit factored on how humid it is, how much flour I measured out, how settled the flour is in the canister. So there's always going to be a little bit fluctuation. So you could make a crust the exact same recipe a week apart and find that one week you use 2 tablespoons of ice water and another week you use 4 tablespoons. But once again, you want it to be ice water because you want everything to be really cold. And you can see I have almost as much ice as I do water. It really should be very, 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 very cold. And the reason everything needs to be cold is that we want to keep the butter suspended in the flour. If it were warmer, it would get blended too smooth and we're not going to get those nice flakes. Beautiful. So I'm kind of just pinching this and squeezing this together. So grabbing butter bits and flaking them between my fingers and then letting those shavings mix into the flour. So the description is often until you reach coarse meal, which is a bit of an odd term, but coarse meal is, think about small pea-sized little bits. We want things to be consistently small, but still stand out and be somewhat distinctive. We don't want them to be totally blended through. So that's a big bit, the one that's right between my thumbs there. These other bits in the palm are looking really good. So I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of my vinegar now. And vinegar just works to suppress gluten development so that you'll have a more delicate flake. I mentioned there are different acidities of different vinegars, so we're using white vinegar, which is more acidic, but we're not using enough that it's going to contribute an off taste. It's a similar principle to where America's Test Kitchen likes to use vodka. Okay, so I'm just putting in a half teaspoon. Mixing that around. And now I'm going to start with a tablespoon of ice water to start. So to get a gauge of how much water I need to use, I'm going to just grab a handful and make a fist. And I want to see how it's holding together. Now this is crumbling a lot, which is a cue that I'm going to need to use a higher amount of ice water. So I'll probably end up using 3 to 4 tablespoons versus 2 to 3. So I will start by putting in 1.5. You can always add more, but you can't take it away. I put in 2. So at this point, I'm going to kind of scoot it back and forth. I don't want to mix it too much, because once water enters the equation, the gluten starts getting developed in our flour. Gluten is elasticity and strength in our flour, and if it gets mixed too much, we simply won't have compromised delicate flakes. So if you think about the texture of a pizza dough, that's a highly developed glutinous dough compared to a biscuit, which is really flaky. So that might be all the water I need to put in. So remember that fist test? I put 2 tablespoons of ice water, grabbing a handful that still looks loose in the hand, making a fist, and seeing how it holds together. Now as I press down, it's flaking back apart, so I'm going to put a little bit more. But most notably, it will still look loose in the bowl. I don't want to add so much water that it comes together into a solid mass. So that's my 3rd tablespoon of ice water. Scoot this back and forth. Great. So grab the fist and press it down. So I'm just going to gather this onto my board, and then the next stage is going to be to prepare this and put it into the fridge. This dough needs to be given an opportunity to relax. So I'm going to use a bench scraper and identify a center seam and just kind of go left to right, top to bottom, folding this on itself until it comes together. If it seems like, it's just not coming, you can dip your fingertips in water and just add a few drops like that, but you don't want to actually spoon in a measured amount of ice water further. Give it a squeeze. And I'm going to be forming this into a disc, and I'm going to wrap it in plastic wrap and put it in the fridge. And then that can be put in the fridge for 30 minutes minimum. I could certainly wrap it and keep it just in the fridge for about 3 or 4 days. If I really wanted to prepare it to store it, I would wrap it more substantially than just in plastic wrap. I would wrap it in plastic, in aluminum foil, and then put it in a Ziploc bag. And a lot of times what I do, say at the start of November, where I know I'm going to be using a lot of both November and December baking, is make 4 of them at a time and just individually wrap them. And then you can quickly pull them out from everything from a savory tart to a pumpkin pie. So just like that. And so you can see there's still bits of butter. That is good. It still has some texture to it. That's good. But I'll wrap this in plastic and into the fridge it goes. So excellent. I look forward to baking with you guys on Friday. If you do have any other questions before that, feel free to email me at emily@firstclasscooking.com. All right. See you then. Bye.